Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to talk about all things related to digital transformation. Today's topic that we're going to dive into today is how to stop being managed by your system integrators and how executives are regaining control or can regain control of their ERP and digital transformation projects. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting company that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. I'll introduce our guest here in just a moment, who I'm excited to have on the show to talk about this very topic. Before I do that, though, a couple logistical things. First of all, we have a global audience joining us here today across all kinds of platforms: YouTube, LinkedIn, um, Facebook, and X. So thanks for joining wherever you're joining from today. We're also streaming to TikTok as well, actually. So thanks for joining wherever you are. And if any questions you have along the way on this topic, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. I'll be pulling audience questions. So I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions you have along the way. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat right now. What city and country are you joining from? I'd love to hear where the global audience is joining from today. We've got my guest and I are on two very different continents, far apart. So it'll be interesting to see where the rest of you are as well. I'm in Denver, Colorado, in the United States, and my guest is joining us from London in the UK. So speaking of our guest, again, our topic is stop being managed by your system integrator, how executives regain control of ERP and digital transformation. Joining me to have this conversation is Stuart Robb, who's our executive vice president in our European branch of Third Stage Consulting. So Stuart, thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, Eric. Good to be here. I'm in Ascot, actually, which is just outside London, near the racecourse. So
Got it.
Not quite central London at the moment.
Yeah, the greater London area, which isn't very descriptive, as big as London is, as sprawling as London is. But thanks for being here today. Tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, Stuart, just tell us a little bit about your background for those that don't know you and your upbringing in the consulting space, the tech space, the Big Four consulting space, all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm EVP, Executive Vice President of Third Stage for EMEA. Working currently in a consulting firm, but hopefully with a slightly different aspect than you would get from the Big Four Tier 1s. I started in IT 42 years ago, and then eventually made my way in the mainframe world, joining or working with Anderson Consulting from about 1996, I guess, to 2000. And then I was AP at Ernst & Young, which became Capgemini, Ernst & Young, for a couple of years. And then I went to Australia to become Director of Transformation Consulting at Capgemini Australia. And then I went freelancing for 15 years until I met you. So, but I've always had, in ERP, you always have close relationships with the SIs. I variously worked with IBM, as you know, obviously, Capgemini, obviously, Anderson's now Accenture, Deloitte, I've worked with a lot recently, KPMG, PwC. So I don't think there's many left for me to get a sort of steak knives.
Right. You've covered all the bases there.
Pretty much.
And I have to a lesser degree, I have a similar background as far as having come from the Big Four consulting firms originally, although you spent a lot more time working at various Big Four consultancies. So I'm hoping that here today we have kind of a unique perspective because we've been part of the Big Four, but we also have seen the other side of the Big Four consultancies. And I know one thing you and I have talked about over the years is there's definite value in what SIs bring to the table, especially the Big Four, the bigger SIs. But there's also a downside risk that needs to be managed as well. And that's what we'll dive into here today.
Yeah, the synopsis, the snapshot of the whole conversation is if you manage an SI well, they will do very well for you because they employ very, very bright people generally who are, supposedly leaders in their game or leaders in their industry. And they work on very, very, very large, complex engagements. And actually, it's rarely that you find an SI has problems with its people. It's quite often a client's inability to manage an SI or understand what they're bringing to the party. Now, having said that, some SIs are, not optimal. I was at one client, which was doing a big re-engineering project for it was an insurance company. And I remember walking into the SI's office, and every desk had Introduction to COBOL on it, which they'd given to all of their graduates and people who were working on the project, because all of them had come out of university with C++ and all the rest of it. None of them knew COBOL, and here we were paying £1,000, £1,200, £1,400 a day for people to program a mainframe that they had never done it before.
Right.
So those are the kind of gotchas that you're gonna have to watch out for. But I mean, in general, on the 80th percentile, you're going to get good people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think the least of our worries in the digital transformation and ERP space is finding smart people. I think there's a lot of really smart people in this industry, especially at the Big Four, and I do agree with you on that. I think they do have a way of finding raw talent and young talent and very smart people. That's I've never really observed that to be a problem or an issue. That's really the least of the issues.
Well, and they pay them extremely well as well. So which is why they're getting paid well. We're paying a lot in fees for them.
Right. Right.
And why would we do that? Well, because they have access to people that are trained in a methodology that's a specific methodology. So we don't have to create a methodology or train them in how to do something. We don't have to build a team. We don't have to have that team on board all the time. We can roll people on and off, and they go back onto the bench as we choose. So SIs get a very bad rap, and sometimes legitimately so, but actually there are a lot of upsides. Very few ERPs are delivered through an in-house team. Nearly all of them of any size will be farmed out to one of the SIs. The trick is to get a good one, and B, to manage them well.
Right. Well, let's start with the latter point you just made, the second point you just made around managing them well. Why? So if we've got smart people, we've got these credible, well-respected consulting firms out there, and not just the Big Four. I mean, you've got other top-tier providers that are well respected in the industry, and let's assume they've all got smart people, they've all got good methodologies. Why is it, or how is it, that organizations then manage to lose control of the system integrator and the overall project as a whole?
Well, there's a whole. I mean, the thing is that usually it all starts going wrong right at the beginning. So you'll come up with a set of requirements. The requirements won't really properly articulate what it is you want. You won't have thought of all of the target operating model implications. 50% of it you might not even know the answer to, like what is our current state of our data estate, and how do we do that data migration. At the beginning of a program, you might not even know. So the smart people will do a reasonably detailed discovery, having decided on which ERP they're using, having selected an SI, based on a response to a set of requirements. The smart people will do a discovery before they ever get to a contract stage. So they'll do 3 months, and they'll say, right, you're our supplier in principle. We're going to see how we're going to work with you. We're going to see whether you're bringing on your A team. If you bring on your A team, we're going to get a key man policy on those people so that we hold on to them when you start delivering it. And you're going to find out everything we haven't told you and everything you don't know, so that when we do a contract with you, which is we call a statement of work, that basically covers the engagement in sufficient detail that you narrow the boundaries at which they can start straying outside of the brief. So a lot of organizations will just go, great, we've chosen an SI, let's contract. And they will sign the contract. The SOW statement will be rubbish or next to rubbish. It'll have massive gaps in it. And as with all the things, you contract in haste, you repent at leisure, right? And so start wrong, end up wrong. I think the other thing is you said the word lose control. I think what happens in my experience in most organizations is the organization cede control.
Yeah, it's a good point
and
of clarification.
and so they assume the SI will come in and run it for them. They have next to no commercial oversight. They have next to no delivery oversight, and then they get very surprised when the SIs run out of control. And it's because most people don't even understand what the SI is doing for them. I was on an engagement where every time there was a problem, the SI brought on another project manager. I mean, we had project managers, literally, there must have been one for making the team. There were so many of them.
Right.
And it's because the SI had a massive bench where it recently had a project that had got stopped, and they had loads and loads of project managers on the bench. And the SI is there to get their bench off of their premises and onto your premises. So unless you're very wise to that, and unless you are really gating that whole process of onboarding and making it really clear what these people are doing, well, just put as many people as they can on. That, you know, it's the old Wolf of Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street thing, isn't it? You know, my job is to take my client's money from their pocket and put it into my pocket. That is all they are there to do. Yes, they'll do some nice delivery, and yes, they'll give you a nice ERP, maybe, but that's not what they're there for. They're there to fatten their partners' wallets and
Right.
to make sure they're not spending money on people that are not on client sites. And you are the gatekeeper. You vet who comes on. You decide whether they're any good. You send them home if they're not. It's all in your power. And most organizations just don't exercise it. They just give it all away. Say, yes, I click on. You know, it's nuts.
Well, it's the easy answer on paper because you're the expert, right? You're the expert. I don't do this every day like you do. I want you to do it right, so I'm just going to outsource this whole thing to you. Which there's some merit to some degree of that, but I think if you go too far that direction, you're right. You're just going to have a conflict of interest.
I mean, I'm doing an engagement at the moment. It's quite complex with an SI. I've got multiple dimensions to it. The SOW for just the one stage we're doing at the moment is over 150 pages. Wow. And it goes into precisely what the scope is and what it isn't. It lists every interface, every bank account, every legal entity. It covers every geography. It covers all the headcount in the geographies. It goes on and on and on and on and on. It's like the perfect project initiation document. In fact, that actually is what it's based on. But the most important thing it has, and I find it baffling, and I come across this time and time again, it has a list of deliverables from each stage or each phase that you can measure. You can measure for quality and you can measure for cost. Every deliverable is broken down by cost. Now, some people say, actually, well, you know, that's far too much effort, and the effort to put that together is onerous. Well, that's why we do a 3-month discovery, because it's building the SOW in a partnership effectively. But there is an alternative way, which I've also used successfully, but it carries a much larger risk profile and generally tends to serve outsourcing style engagements rather than delivery engagements, which is actually, you don't bother with an SOW at all. You just say, the solution that you deliver must produce these business outcomes. So let's say if it was a telco, you must be able to go on, order a phone, add the accessories, create the price plan, have it delivered to your door, and it must be, when you switch it on, it must automatically enable and activate. And your UAT is against that outcome. It's not against a billion business requirements. Yes, there are loads of business requirements about administration and fixing somebody's bill if they've cocked it up or whatever. But the implicit business requirement is you can either provision a phone or you can't. If you can't, you're not getting paid. If you can, happy days. There you go. So either way works and either way doesn't work. It just as I said, you have to kind of navigate your way through the engagement to decide which way you want to go. Lots and lots of detail, or almost no detail at all, and just nail them on business outcome.
Right. Right. No, that's great. And it's a great point, because the other issue is that even with all that detail early in a project, a lot of times you don't know enough
Yeah.
about the project, all the assumptions and the scope. A lot of times you don't know enough because you haven't done the due diligence. You haven't gotten into discovery, requirements gathering a lot of times.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, it's a multi-step process. So, as I said, when the current engagement I'm working on with a client at the moment, and I'm sure Deloitte won't lie me telling you that it's Deloitte. We started off effectively with a RFP there was a piece of work that was done actually before I joined the project, which was all the traditional requirements. But at the point we were engaging, I just said it's perfectly simple. I want a working version of D365 for this business. That's it. You'll get paid if it works. You get slaughtered if it won't. And then they did the discovery. And then when they'd done the discovery, we had our 150-page SOW, and we had lots and lots of stage gates, lots of detail in how it would be delivered, how it would be paid, and there's a concept called burn down, which we'll talk about in a little while when we're talking about what good governance looks like. But it was effectively a multi-step contracting process. So business outcome first. Can you deliver this business outcome? Yes, we can. Good. How and how much is it going to cost? Step 2.
right. Yeah. Yeah. These are some good strategies to manage all these moving parts. I want to turn to the audience real quickly. Thanks for chiming in. Those of you that have chimed in so far on where you're joining from. Someone on YouTube is joining from Stellenbosch, South Africa. Beautiful country. Thank you for being here today. Darian joining on LinkedIn says, good morning. Thank you for that, Darian. And then Graham R56 on YouTube joining from Cape Town, South Africa. So a good South African contingency here today. Here's a question that came up a little bit earlier in this conversation, Stuart, and this is from Ken on LinkedIn. And this is something, this is in response to, I think, to a comment I made about young talent. But Ken says, why is the word young always used in the same sentence with good talent? Why isn't the experienced talent held in the same esteem, those of us with tacit knowledge along with explicit knowledge? And that's a great point. And that I in no way want to suggest that people with experience are not talented. I think my point was more about the youth of some of the big four consulting firms, and not so much older people or more experienced people don't have it. But it is a good point. It is worth talking about is, how hard is it to find people that actually have experience under their belts, people that don't have to come in and read the training manuals like you were talking about, Stuart?
Yeah,
how hard is that to find?
I have to be very careful what I say here, because there's all sorts of employment laws and things like that I can't tread it too carefully on.
I've never known you to have a filter, so why start now?
Oh, no. We're not allowed to have ageism at all. It has to be completely agnostic. So quite rarely you'll get a CV where it won't say the person's age at all. But I can read a CV and roughly position how old they are within 30 seconds, just by where they've worked, what they've done, who they've worked for. My preference actually is I prefer people with more experience. So if you're talking about 30 to 35 plus, you will get better. Generally, you'll get better people who are more mature in the workplace. And my teams tend, I tend to try to build teams of like people. Where you've got newer technologies like AI, you tend to have to go younger. And sometimes you find those teams don't mix terribly well. There's an attitudinal and cultural, use culturally in inverted commas. It's the millennial versus the Gen whatever we are, Gen X or something.
Yeah.
And there is a different way of behaving and a different way of engaging that, I mean, I'm 59, 60 this year. it's just completely alien to me. So I tend to try and find a manager to bring in and say, you manage this lot, and you just tell me when they've done what they're supposed to do. So I'm not. I think I wouldn't use young and good talent. I would use good talent. I mean, I wouldn't associate it with a particular age group. You can have great talent who are young. You can have great talent who are old, or you can have rubbish talent at any age.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there is not a correlation between age and talent. It's, I think,
experience.
Yeah, age and experience, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that sometimes, and this is just a very broad generalization that does not apply in many, maybe even most cases, but sometimes you'll see people that have been doing this for so long that the only risk I see with the more experienced people at times is that sometimes they stop listening or they stop asking questions because they think I've done this a million times. Yeah. Mr. or Mrs. Client, you're not that different. You're all the same. Just follow best practices. You sort of get more of a myopic view sometimes. But that's,
I mean, let's be honest though. I mean, I think I said this in the last one of these we did. I mean, ERPs are adding up and taking away, right? They're not really very difficult. I mean, add one to the stock count, decrement one to the
right.
stock. You don't. They're difficult to implement, not because conceptually they're difficult to do. Conceptually, they're very simple things to do, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's accounting or whatever it is. It's a very, very simple thing to do. Which then, you then go, well, why do so many of them go wrong? It's usually because people don't understand and underestimate the effort it takes to change people from the job they do today to the job they do tomorrow. And no SI is going to help you. Well, they will say they will help you, but changing people's behavior and changing what people do every day is the really difficult thing. It's not, can I config this to do this or that? Very, very rarely have I ever pulled a ERP or a billing, actually, which for telco is much more complex. I think I've done it once. And that's because there was a misalignment between two systems calculating VAT. And it kept coming up with different numbers in both systems because of a rounding error and therefore giving the customer the wrong offer. And that was such a subtle thing. I mean, we just didn't spot it in UAT, and so I had to pull it, and it was horrible, and we had to spend 3 months figuring out how to fix it and release it again. But that is extremely rare.
Right.
The normal thing that goes wrong is the client loses control of the scope, or the costs start running out of control because all sorts of things start being surfaced that we didn't think about when we started, and we didn't put in enough contingency, or quite rarely does it go back to the technical implementation. As I said, it does happen now and again, but it's generally quite rare.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too around, changing people's jobs, changing people's behavior, changing the way they operate today. That does not happen simply because you have a functioning technology in place. But I think it's easy for us as consultants at times to downplay or to disregard how things work today because we know we want to change it. In some cases, we know that it is subpar. And so rather than saying, this process sucks, so you should just change it, it's easy to say that as an outsider. Like, Stuart, the way you do things today, it's a mess, it's inefficient, it's ineffective. Just stop doing that and use this technology because this technology is better. That's not going to be very effective, even if that's true.
Well,
you have ownership of that.
That's the Elon Musk thing, right? I mean, Elon Musk did this little vignette a few years ago. All requirements are rubbish. So, and he's right. All requirements are rubbish. You can never articulate a requirement in sufficient clarity to be clear about what you mean. And most of the requirements will always be based on what you know about and have done today, not a fresh set of thinking on requirements tomorrow. So, it's absolutely, he's absolutely correct. And actually, he's also correct that probably 30% of things that businesses do, they should just stop doing altogether because they actually add no value. So, do they add customer value? Do they add revenue or profitability? No. Are they statutory required? No. Stop doing them then. So there are, we can take those lessons away. But I think the other thing is that there's a tendency to believe that NSI prioritizes technology rather than business outcomes. But actually, that's because most of the time we're not asking the SI to change a business outcome or to implement a new target operating model. We're asking them to implement a piece of technology, and we take the accountability as the business ourselves to manage the people change and to create a new process architecture and all the other stuff. And we're not very good at that, and therefore that often ends up failing because that's not a skill. It's a skill we think we have, but it turns out it's not a skill that we do have. And then you get the flip side where you do try to get the SI in to do the business change, and they don't understand the organization or the culture or the politics. So they start slamming into, executive incentive schemes that aren't aligned and all the other nonsense that goes on. And so again, you create a failure point where actually, if you'd thought about it a bit harder to start with, you'd realize actually we're not set up for success. Nearly all of this comes back to setting yourself up for success. And this is, start wrong, you'll never, ever end up right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And here's a follow-up question that touches back on a point that you made earlier, or that we talked about earlier, Stuart. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. She says, do you think most executives actually want control, or are they consciously trading it away for psychological safety? In other words, does it just feel safer if I just say, hey, let the big SI handle this. They're the experts. They've got this under control.
Well, that's a really, really interesting point, and that is very well made, because executives do think that if you get EY or Accenture or Deloitte or whoever it is in the room, and you've got their senior partner schmoozing you and giving you the 9-figure sum that it's going to cost to implement, they feel almost like a emotional relief that they're paying so much money to do this big thing, and it's all going to go perfectly. And they then become very surprised when it's all gone horribly wrong, and all of a sudden they've been fired. And I've seen it a number of times actually, where an exec has generally gone on with the belief that because it's been given it to the SI, he's now offloaded all of that executive accountability onto the SI. And if it all goes horribly wrong, we can sue the SI and we are all absolved of blame. And I was involved in one where a whole raft of senior heads, including the CEO, either retired or got scalped because the thing had been such an unmitigated disaster. And the fact that they got an SI in hadn't helped them at all. Right. Especially as it was evidence later that they actually hadn't listened to what the SI was telling them and advising them in the first place. That also didn't help.
Right. No, it's a great point. And how do you actually, I'm going to bring up another question that leads into mine here. Here's another question from Ken, and I'm going to build on Ken's question here. But Ken on LinkedIn says, I've always said that if you really want to understand the product you're getting from any service provider, understand the revenue model. The SI's revenue model is billable hours. So my question for you, Stuart, just to build on this is, so going into these relationships that there is an inherent conflict of interest, because you think about it. I mean, the longer you take to implement technology, or the longer this project takes, the more overruns you have, the more change orders you have, the more your system integrator benefits. And it's hard for me to think of a good example of something comparable where there is such an inherent conflict of interest between customer and supplier, but yet here we are in the tech space where it does exist. How do you manage that? How do you navigate that conflict of interest?
I mean, I do it in two ways. One is I do it in a number of ways. One is I nail them on the business outcome for a particular amount of money, and there are all sorts of revenue models that you can put in place. I personally tend not to like fixed price for the simple reason that I'm transferring the risk to the SI and I'm giving them a risk premium, but that's not going to stop them change requesting the hell out of the program. So my costs are going to go up anyway. So actually, I've almost never used fixed price as a control. What I do is one is to catch time and materials. So I hold the contingency. but I rigorously manage the delivery of what they're doing. I don't micromanage them, but I will give you a good example of what I will do. So let's say we've got 5 sprints. I hate that agile term, but it's useful in this context. Let's say we've got 5 sprints, and then we've got a testing and UAT and deploy. So each one of those sprints will have a specific set of outcomes, which we can define in our statement of work. It will have a cost, which is basically the aggregation of a number of man days by a number of resources to produce that deliverable. And then that deliverable will need to have a quality threshold. I call it the Holy Trinity: cost/resources, deliverables, and quality. So at the end of that sprint and through the sprint, once a month, once a week, usually once a month, I will get a burn down chart. And the burn down chart is on something called earned value. So earned value is not how much we've spent. Earned value is how much we've spent versus how much we've delivered. So if halfway through the time I've spent half the money, but I've delivered half of the number of deliverables that I was expecting to deliver, and they're of acceptable quality, I am on target. If I have spent 75% of the money and only delivered 25% of the deliverables, and of those 5% they've got to redo at their own cost, well, I'm massively behind.
Right.
And you can also use this theory in other ways as well. So on one project, not this one actually, but on one, we were under burning. So I was expecting a graph, let's call it a 45-degree angle, and we were only actually tracking up at about 30 degrees. And I knew, therefore, immediately, without even having to go and look, that we were under delivering, because we couldn't possibly be delivering what we had planned to deliver by this point if we're under burning. Because it just means we either haven't got the right number of resources on board, which for an SI is unlikely, or we haven't got enough material to feed the SI machine. So we haven't worked out how X is supposed to work. We haven't made a decision on Y, X, Y, Z, whatever those issues are. And all of that is slowing the SI down. And therefore, the actual amount of money spent that they're spending is less than we had anticipated. So burn down is earned value. Burn down is an excellent, God-given, golden way of managing and tracking whether or not you're on track on a program or not. I don't do these now without having some form of burn down report.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it works really well for in the construction industry. I know aerospace and defense a lot of times will do it.
Yeah,
it works. That's why they do it, is because they're such big, massive projects that they don't want to find out 90% of the way in that they're actually
only 10% of the work is done. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
The thing is, the trouble is, okay, we are incredibly amateurish in IT. I mean, construction has been done for 2,000 years, right? And so is defense, probably longer than that. Okay, we've been doing this for 50, and it shows, because we don't have an industry-wide discipline. We don't have quantity surveyors. We don't have, proper, what I would call architects who can, work with the QS and work with the main contractor, the general contractor, to actually, develop plans that are robust. I mean, construction projects go wrong too, but it's quite rare that a building falls down because it's not been constructed right. Whereas it's quite common that a piece of technology, an ERP or an HCM or something, blows up because we've not been following a good set of disciplines.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. It never occurred to me that IT's relative lack of track record and immaturity compared to other industries might be part of the problem. That never occurred to me until just now. Talking about construction that's been doing this for a long time, and I think if we treated these projects more like we would inherently and intuitively treat a construction project, we'd probably do a lot better. Because if you think about all the things you should be doing with a construction or you should be doing with an IT project, you would absolutely do in a construction project. So things like you don't just hire a subcontractor in a construction project like a plumber and electrician, just have them go do whatever they need to do, and they're just going to bill you by the hour without any sort of direction or business outcome, as you would say.
Yeah.
But yet that's what we do in IT a lot.
It's nuts, right?
It is.
and the outcome is entirely predictable.
Yeah, we know what's going to happen, and then we wonder why. And then you and I sit here having these conversations. Why do these projects fail so often? Well,
because they're not.
Maybe it's because we're not running them well.
Manage them properly. Yeah, exactly. We're not running them right.
Exactly. There's a couple longer comments. I'm going to try and condense these if I can. This one's from Laik on LinkedIn. I'll just get to part of your question here, Laik, because I think your first part is really good. I'm sure I've said this before, but the reason I keep saying be your own decision maker is simple. In a lot of transformation programs, there's no real decision maker in the room, or there's no one who can challenge the SI, ask the hard questions, and say, hold on, prove it. That's the real problem.
That prove it is the most, I mean, I use trust but verify. And there are two aspects to that. One is the vendor management side, which again, organizations tend to do extraordinarily badly with SIs. So, you know, just the simple stuff like tracing what's been delivered, tracing how the money's being spent, tracing whether people on the SI are being productive is done, you know, much worse than we would do if a builder was building our extension. You know, if the wall is crooked, we look at it and get a spirit level and say, well, that's crooked, take it down and do it again. We very rarely get down to that level of intrusive management. And it's true to say that you shouldn't have to, but, you know, for every 10 things they tell you, you should check one,
right.
You know, because it's just good practice. I think the other thing, I don't want to sell the services at third stage too much. Yeah, actually, yes, I do. But I mean, the reason for having people who really understand the SIs in the room on the client side, I mean, you and I both do a lot of client side management and assurance, is precisely because we know exactly, or usually we can see it all starting to wobble before it comes off the rails. And we know what the right questions to ask. I mean, I was saying to somebody, I mean, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, I had to do all of this really, it was hard work. Now I can usually even just feel instinctively, you know, whether it feels right or it feels wrong. And, you know, you don't need to look at a RAG report. In fact, they're the worst, most useless indicators of trouble or not that there is.
Yes.
Because you can, it's very interesting. I had this with a client. I was speaking to their group internal audit, and they were saying, well, your RAG criteria are not consistent. Your work stream is reporting red, and yet your report to the main board is green. So how do you reconcile that? And I went, well, there's dozens of ways I can reconcile it. The question is, why is the work stream status report red? Is it red because they're not failing to deliver? Is it red because they're off budget? Is it red because they're not getting business engagement or resources? So what does that red actually mean? And then is that having any impact on the actual critical path or not? And does anybody even know what the critical path is? No, they didn't. And then you can say, so I have an objective to separate this company by the 1st of September. Okay, this work stream is red. All these other ones are green. So if I have all these green work streams deliver on time by the 1st of September, and this one that's red not, then is that red or green? Because I can still separate without this work stream. And so once you start drilling into what RAG means, what it means is nothing. It's meaningless. So I actually prefer to use RAG in the same way that you would use it on an airliner or, you know, any critical system. You know, if there is something that's amber in a nuclear power station, actually, I think they use white. But if there's something amber, okay, that means a value is out of tolerance and you need to go and investigate it, but it's not a critical risk. So go and figure out why it's not right and make a course correction. If it's flashing red, it's a master caution. That means the gear's not come down, you've dumped all your hydraulic fluid, or you've run out of fuel. In which case, that is a critical issue. Intervention is immediately required to course correct. And so you should be spending all of your attention on finding out what the problem is and going through what in airplanes they call QRF, a quick reference. But the problem is that even boards over rely on RAG to tell the truth. And there is no objective truth in RAG. It is just a sense of an alert for action.
Right.
And if you treat it like that, you'll create the right behaviours. If you treat it as an indicator of how wonderful your project is going, you're just it's just another failure point.
Which is unfortunately what happens a lot, because it becomes a self-preservation and a CYA tool, because you don't, and that's why we don't grade our own homework when we're in school or university growing up. The reason we don't grade our own homework is because we would have a bias or inherent need to, maybe not be as truthful as we want to be or as candid as we want to be with our own performance. And that's essentially what happens a lot of times, is these SIs are grading their own homework and saying, hey, things are green. Yeah, there's a few hiccups here and there, but these are totally normal. We'll work through it after go live. We'll work through those issues, or we'll push that out to phase 2. They've always got a reason, but they're not always good reasons.
I mean, there's a couple of points in there you make are really important, and that's like, unless you're measuring burn really carefully, what you'll find is that if and I actually pulled an organisation up on this a year or so ago, that the work was not 100% complete, but they'd reported the burn down as 100%. And I said, well, how can the burn down be 100% if only 90% of the work has been done? What you're going to do is you're going to steal money from the next phase to pay for unfinished work in this phase. What you should be doing is CRing this phase for an extra 10% money and leaving the next phase alone. Otherwise, what you're going to be doing is creating a bow wave of incomplete activity that's going to continue to add cost until you get 2/3 of the way through the project, and then you're going to run out of money. Now, that on a project I was on quite early in my career is exactly what happened. The other thing as well is I find actually generally with RAGs, we start the first week of the project with everybody being really happy and their RAG is green. And then week 2, it goes amber, and it stays amber until the project is complete, when it goes back to green again, or it goes blue for complete or whatever. But, really they're pretty meaningless.
Yeah. Well, and Ken has a really good point that I swear I did not pay Ken to say this, but Ken on LinkedIn says you're making an argument for a strong PMO oversight and governance. Should that not be an independent advisory consultant with a good amount of that tacit knowledge along with explicit knowledge?
And if Ken wants to send me his contact details, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse in that exact regard.
Right.
I mean, that's why we exist, right? That's one of Third Stage's biggest planks of business in Europe, is doing precisely this. We do PMOs, we do, I do private equity and separations, but I manage SIs all the time. So whether I'm managing them directly or whether I'm providing the assurance, that's a good plank of business that we do in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think actually it helps. I mean, I know there aren't that many players in the UK, certainly. So I know quite a lot of the people anyway who do the really large projects, because there aren't actually that many of them. If you think there are the top 4 SIs, and each one of them has a practice lead and a couple of good senior directors across Oracle, in each one, you're probably talking 20 or 30 people in the UK that can actually do really big, heavy lift ERP and HCM or similar projects. There aren't actually that many. And so you tend to know, even from the individual, Who are you dealing with? How did they do it the last one? What are the things to watch out for? And again, that's a behaviors and cultural thing that you can't teach somebody, and there's no checklist that can give you that. You just know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, Ken brings up a good point too around, the phenomena of having a RAG or a project status report that shows all green when in fact it is not green. Or you've got a yellow or red, but it's, hey, this just is normal stuff. Don't worry about it. It's fine. We're addressing it. Sometimes it's true, but a lot of times it's not true. And if you have someone who is objective and independent and isn't worried about hurting anyone's feelings, then you're going to get a more candid outcome. I know one thing we struggle with as a company, if we're being candid here, is that sometimes when we're working with especially the bigger SIs, is they'll downplay our assessment. If we say something's a risk, they'll say, yeah, but that's not a big deal. We're the SAP experts, we're the Oracle experts, whatever, Microsoft, whatever the product is we're implementing. We're the experts. These guys are third stage or independent. They're tech agnostic. They don't really understand that this is just normal. This is a normal process. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not a good excuse to to fix it.
I tend to try wherever possible, especially when I'm doing things like assurance, I try to deal in facts, things that I can prove.
Right.
Sometimes you will present an idea and it will not, you won't be able to back it up with evidence. It'll just be a feeling, and that's okay. But as far as reasonably possible, will use the example. They've said they've done 90% of the work. They said they've done 70% of the work, but they billed you 90% of the money. So there's a 20% gap. Now you can call that red, amber, green, or you can call it Fred or Charlie. I don't really care what you call it. There is a gap that they have not addressed. So it's not, oh, this is what normally happens in a project of this stage. This is, there's a clear differential between what they should have delivered and how much they should have charged and how much you have been charged. It's as simple as that. Now, the good vendor manager will be going back and saying to the SI, okay, you've done this and done that, and they'll find 50 million excuses under the sun as to why it's the client's fault and not their fault. And you go, it's all very interesting. So what are you going to do about it? And the what are you going to do about it question, you have to get to the right level in the SI before that question gets answered properly. Usually the partner or the senior partner, right? But eventually you'll get to the person who'll go, yeah, our mistake, or we think it's 50-50, us and the client will take 50% of the culpability, because they have an interest for these things to be successful too, and they make a minimum 50% margin, normally between 75 and 80% margin on these. They have got lots of fat in these deals, and they put a risk margin, and they put loads of line items in, unless you're really on board. I remember there was a budget I was given once. I might have told you this before. A budget I was given once, and it had 50,000 UK pounds in it for CSL, and I inherited it from somebody else. We got to the end of the program, and I went, "What is this CSL?" And nobody knew, and I hadn't spent anything. So I phoned up my predecessor. I said, "What the blooming hell is this CSL?" And he went, "What's the Carling Stein Lager Fund? If it all went horribly wrong, I'd have spent out of that. And if it all went brilliantly, then we were going to go down a pub and go and have loads of Carling Stein Lager." I went, 50 grand.
Right.
But, hidden contingencies, right? You will create a deliverable that you'll add 10% onto the cost of the deliverable, because there's your 10% contingency. I mean, you can hide contingency everywhere, and SIs do. Why wouldn't they? I do, and I'm client side.
Right.
I have a big line that says contingency. I know for an absolute fact that as soon as the project gets a bit tricky and the board don't like the number, they're going to get a red pen on that and divide it by 2. So I have the contingency I can afford to give away, and then all the hidden contingency that's spread everywhere else.
Right. Those are great points. So before I ask you this next question, Stuart, one thing I want to share with the audience is we do have a guide to selecting and managing your system integrator that I encourage you to download. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or I'll drop it in the comments below as well. But if you download that off our website, it's a free resource. It gives you some advice on the things to look for as you're trying to define or evaluate your system integrator, as well as how to manage that system integrator appropriately. So I'll leave that up there for you for a moment for you to let you scan that and peruse that offline once we're done here. But in the meantime, Stuart, and another question that I have for you is, are there certain activities that should never be delegated to a system integrator, or on the flip side, things that absolutely should be delegated or relegated to the SI's responsibility?
Well, the vendor management should never be delegated to the SI. You have to be in charge of your own destiny, right? And ultimately, whether you have a assurer or a client-side program director, or whatever structure you put in place, ultimately the accountability has to be that of the client, and the client has to be in control. And if the client isn't in control, then it is by default going to go horribly wrong, because you've got a commercial operation who is there to create and generate profits, basically, taking money out of your company with no proper oversight and no proper governance. So it doesn't really matter what the governance is, more other than the fact that you've got to be doing it, and you've got to be doing it with rigor. So whether you do that through a commercial vehicle or a program delivery vehicle or an oversight PMO or whatever it is, you've got to, and what you've also got to do is to make sure that the SI doesn't try to shield you out of it as well. Right. So you've got to be C-suite appointed as the C-suite proxy to do that control, so that C-suite proxy is managing the SI, is controlling the spend, is managing the scope, is making sure people are not coming onto the program left, right, and centre, start billing for doing God knows what. And that's your responsibility as the client, to make sure that control process and control mechanism is in place. I mean, Graham R56, sorry, says delegate to the SI, poacher becomes gamekeeper. Well, yeah, actually, I consider myself now to be the gamekeeper to the SI poachers. And so I do what I can to make sure that I've got good governance in place. And to be honest with you, an SI who wants a good long-term relationship with the client will actually appreciate that, because I'm quite prepared to turn around to his lordship, whoever that C-suite person is, and say, it's not the SI cocking this up, it's us, and we need to do these actions. And I can have that conversation, and that will carry some weight, because it's not the SI saying it's all your fault. It's somebody who is client side says, how can we be saying to the SI X when we're not doing Y? Right. That carries quite a lot of gravity with it, and usually those kind of interventions can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot like the fox guarding the hen house is the other saying that we often use.
Yeah.
And here's a follow-up that Ken has that builds on Graham's point and the point you just made, Stuart. And that is this. He says, quite often, however, the client product sponsor doesn't want that bad cop PMO in the room challenging the system integrator. They don't want the stakeholders to think there's a built-in conflict, which then feeds the change management question, why are we doing this?
No,
so how have you addressed that? I know that's something you're really good at, is navigating that.
I mean, any client who is being delivered to by any supplier, there is an inherent quote unquote conflict. Okay, whether it's an SI delivering me an ERP or the dodgy builder outside building my extension, there is a conflict point. Okay, I want the job done as cheap as possible for the highest possible quality. The builder wants the job to be referenceable, but he wants the most amount of money out of it. That's a straightforward commercial relationship. Now, what it might come across is that I am bad cop. Well, yes, I am bad cop, absolutely. When it requires bad cop, I am bad cop, because all I am doing is holding the supplier to account. That's it. Okay. If they said they were going to do something and they've not done it, then I will hold them to account. If it's our fault, then I will hold us to account. I will hold the C-suite or whoever internally has been pulling their weight or whatever the reason is. But that doesn't mean you have to have a bad relationship. It doesn't mean you have to go into every meeting, with your thumping your fist on the table and throwing things at the SI. In fact, that's the last thing you want to be doing. There's a great. I was taught by a guy who was actually the general manager of Ford purchasing in Europe, part of the Chartered Institute of Purchasing Supply, and he said actually the way to get the best out of a vendor is to be warm but tough. So to develop a warm, collegiate relationship, go down with the vendor, have a beer, or whatever, but make it absolutely clear that there's a line that is not going to be crossed, and that you don't want to see, bad cop side. And if it comes to that, you will just hold your ground and you will just be tough, and you won't go. I mean, if you ever go to law with an ERP program, you have failed. So you don't want to be in a position where you are threatening them with, adjudication or law. You want them to deliver you what you think they have promised you to deliver at a cost that they have agreed to deliver it by. And that is always your tunnel vision. That's always your focus. Are they delivering what we wanted to at the price? If they're not, what course corrections do we need to make? That might be course corrections that they have to make. There might be course corrections that we as a client have to make. But the end goal always has to be the same. Is the delivery going to be successful? And are we going to get it in time and to roughly the price and quality that we were expecting?
Right. And I think it's, if we focus on those business outcomes, which has been a recurring theme of what you've suggested here today, if we focus on business outcomes and take out the emotion, I think that's a big thing, because I think Ken's question brings up a broader issue, which is a lot of times the SI feels threatened because you're calling them out, and it's almost like it's a personal vendetta or a personal indictment on the firm, and it's not. It's about the client. It's about what is the client getting, what are they not getting, and what do we need to do to make this client successful. And if we all focus on that and take the emotion out of it, we shouldn't be offended by anything that anyone does in these projects.
Yeah, I mean, the SI. Most of the time, I have a very, very good relationship with the SIs, but that's because I've been working with the same people for like 20 years, right? So I know them well. And we have a very, very collegiate relationship. We see each other from one engagement to the next. Some of the engagements have gone well and some have gone slightly less well. There are a number of players who have tried in the past to edge me out or push me out, or basically play a few games at the client, and those people have found that I'm quite a formidable operator when I need to be. I mean, when I play chess, I play at least 10 moves ahead, and so some people who are trying to outsmart me with 3 moves find themselves in for a massive disappointment.
Right.
So, again, partly I don't want to have a bad relationship with anyone, and I certainly don't want to have a bad relationship with an SI. But you muck about with me, you're gonna find me. I can play games too, and I can play them usually quite effectively.
Yeah, but I've seen you do that though, and it's all in the name of the client, though. That's the difference, or that's the thing. You're doing it because you're trying to make sure that this client is successful.
Yeah.
And that they're dealing with reality, not a pipe dream.
They don't want some SIs, and there's very few of them, some individuals, and I want to come back to the point of individuals. Some individuals see you as a threat, so they try to, what do they call it? Fence you off, and then, get you out of the picture, undermine you. And usually I've just found that the simple thing is to just play the straight bat, because quite often my experience and the experience of people like me is such that actually they have quite a difficult time nailing their particular arguments closed. And I always go back to the evidence. I think there is a point though, and it is very, very important. And it's something that I always take with when you are dealing with an SI, you are not dealing with a firm. You are, but you're actually dealing with an individual. Now, that individual happens to work for a firm, and those firms have certain cultural traits and behaviors that you can kind of identify the difference between one or another. But in general, when you're buying a SI, you're buying one or more individuals. And therefore, very start, if the individual that you get is not someone you think you're going to be able to develop a good relationship and you're not going to be able to work with, you just say straight away. There's usually a senior partner or a senior partner or a managing partner or somebody you can go and say, I really like your proposition, but I just don't think it's gelling with this chap. And we really need to, if you can, swap him out because KPMG are beating my door down. And you usually find that that does the trick, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good stuff. So, in addition to the audience here downloading this guide to managing SIs, which is on the QR code right here, I'll include it in the links below. Be sure to download that. It's a free guide on our website on how to select and manage the best system integrator for your situation. What kind of closing advice do you have for leaders that are trying to get started or trying to figure out what path to go down with their system integrator, whether it's trying to find the right one, manage them? What's the top 2 or 3 things that you would say every leader needs to know before they get engaged with one of these bigger system integrators?
Don't rush it.
Okay.
Take your time. Make sure that the partner you're getting has the capability, works effectively with your team, and has the right behaviors and attitudes. So find a piece of work for them to do. Help with the enterprise architecture. Do a discovery. Do anything that's a small, contained, couple of $100,000 piece of work. You can work with them that you've validated that you think that they are people that you can trust and work with. Number 2, remember it's a contract to deliver stuff. If your contract is bad, then you will never recover from it. So get a contract in place that has very clear business outcomes and a way of measuring how you're progressing through the delivery so that you can checkpoint along the way to make sure that the expectations of what you've spent so far is roughly in line with what you were expecting to be delivered so far. So, it's good. It's good relationship. Start with a small piece of work. Make sure the relationship is effective. It's good governance. Make sure you've got a way of tracking the Holy Trinity. And then I think probably lastly, it's don't be afraid to intervene and verify and check or course correct if you think things are not going right. Don't let the problem with the SI become irremediable. If you think you are having a problem and you're not sure, get someone in, not necessarily third stage. There are 1 or 2 other people out there, I think, who can do the sort of services that third stage provide. But get someone in to have a look at it, because it's much cheaper to have a look at it and fix it before it becomes a catastrophe than it is for it to be a catastrophe and then get somebody in to try and fix it.
Yeah. And I think that might be the most important tip you've made throughout this conversation, or the most important thread that you've touched on, which is, no matter what, no matter how much you like the SI, no matter how good the system integrator is, don't cede control without having that trust but verify governance and mentality in place, because ultimately you do have to manage them just like you would any contractor, just like you would manage, if you were going to have a house built, if you or I were going to have a house built, going back to the construction analogy, I highly doubt either you or I or anyone listening right now would say, okay, we're going to hire a contractor and just tell them to go build us a house. And we're going to trust them because they're really good at what they do and we like them and they've got good references, they're a good name, blah, blah, blah. That will not be successful, will not meet our needs because we haven't managed it, we haven't been active in it, we haven't put guardrails in place for the contractor. But yet that tends to be the mentality of what we see in the IT space, is that we'll just cede control. We won't put governance in place. We'll let the SI manage us rather than us managing the SI. And I think that's one of the big problems we face.
Well, and it's fatal, right? I mean, it's a good way to lose a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah. I always look at the discipline that some of our clients have when they are going to do another big capital investment. Like they're going to go acquire a company, they're going to build a factory, they're going to build a new distribution center. The amount of discipline they have in those sorts of projects is totally different than the lack of discipline that you see in IT projects. Yet the price tags are the same. The risk profiles are arguably even higher for IT projects, yet we manage them a lot looser.
Absolutely baffling. And as I said, it's not that we can't do it. It's the fact that there's no industry imperative that that is the norm. It's the exception, not the norm, and it shouldn't be. And it is what it is, right?
Totally agree. Well, thank you for being here, Stuart. This was a really good conversation. I appreciate you taking the time out, especially on a holiday week like this. So I thank you for being here, and thank you
everyone.
Yes, happy holidays to everyone listening. Thank you for being here today. We'll be back again next week, same time, same place. I hope wherever you are, whatever you celebrate this holiday season, I hope you enjoy time with family and hope you get a little bit of downtime, a little bit of time to rest, and look forward to seeing you next week. So have a great week, everyone, and we will see you next week, same time, same place. We'll see you all soon. Take care. Thank you.